Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Here are our top stories for tonight. Trump warns Israel not to interfere in Syria. And Putin and Trump's envoy set for Ukraine talks. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. United States President Donald Trump warns Israel to avoid destabilizing Syria or its new leadership, days after a deadly operation by Israeli forces killed 13 people. Trump has been pushing for a security pact between Israel and Syria since President Ahmed al-Shara's coalition overthrew longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad a year ago.
In a post on Truth Social, Trump said Israel should maintain steady dialogue with Syria and refrain from actions that could undermine Damascus's efforts to secure stability and economic recovery. Tensions have continued to rise, with Israel conducting hundreds of strikes inside Syria in recent years. Friday's strike in Beijing was described by Syrian authorities as a war crime. Israel said it had targeted an Islamist group operating in the area. Trump said he was encouraged by Syria's progress under President Shara, who was once branded a terrorist by the United States and later became the first Syrian leader to visit the White House. He said Shara had begun introducing reforms and argued that Syria and Israel could eventually build a stable, long-term relationship.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to meet U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow later today to discuss the war in Ukraine. Jared Kushner, President Donald Trump's son-in-law and outside advisor, is also expected to attend. The White House says it is optimistic about reaching a deal to end the conflict. Now, the summit follows 2 days of talks in Florida between Ukrainian and U.S. officials, including Witkoff and Kushner. Their main focus was to fine-tune a U.S.-backed peace plan that Kyiv and the European Union have criticized as too favorable to Russia. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the discussions as constructive, though he said several issues remain unresolved. He added that Ukraine's priorities were protecting its sovereignty and securing strong security guarantees. That's our top news. Stay with us for more right after this break.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Buli di sekolah. Isu ini bukan perkara baru.
Buli tertakluk kepada perbuatan agresif secara fizikal.
Apa sebenarnya jerabu punca utama yang menyumbang kepada masalah ini serta kesannya kepada kesihatan kita?
Mereka akan mengalami iritasi kepada mata. Selain itu, iritasi kepada saluran pernafasan.
Daulat Tuanku.
Welcome back. Tensions are rising in the Caribbean as U.S. President Donald Trump meets his national security team to discuss the next steps on Venezuela. His administration is facing renewed calls from lawmakers to release more details, particularly over a controversial September decision to strike an alleged drug smuggling boat twice, killing the remaining survivors in the second attack. Last week, Trump said land operations against Venezuelan criminal groups could begin very soon, signaling a sharp escalation of months-long U.S. strikes. Over the weekend, U.S. lawmakers pledged to tighten oversights after reports that War Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered everyone on a suspected smuggling boat to be killed. The White House, through spokesperson Carolyn Leavitt, confirmed Hegseth authorized the initial strike, but said a top Navy admiral approved a second attack on the vessel and defended the move as lawful. More than 80 people have died in similar strikes across the Caribbean Sea since early September. In Caracas, President Nicolas Maduro accused Washington of seeking to oust him, telling supporters in a rally on Monday that Venezuela does not want a slave's peace. Trump confirmed he recently spoke with Maduro but did not disclose details. In a Reuters report citing sources, Maduro allegedly requested full amnesty for himself and his family, the lifting of sanctions, and the end of an ICC case against him. Trump declared Venezuela's airspace closed over the weekend, raising concerns about possible U.S. military action. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has defended his efforts to restore relations with China, while acknowledging Beijing poses national security threats to the UK. Speaking to business leaders in London, Starmer says Britain must protect itself but still pursue economic opportunities. He insisted that security will not be traded for economic access, calling it non-negotiable, but said that where risks are low, the UK will actively support companies seeking to expand in China. This includes financial services, pharmaceuticals and luxury goods, sectors he called great British success stories. Since taking office, Starmer has pushed for closer engagement with Beijing, including multiple visits by senior cabinet ministers seeking overseas investment to support growth in Britain. Starmer's approach has faced criticism after his advisers were accused of playing a role in the collapse of the prosecution of two men charged with spying for China. Meanwhile, plans for a new Chinese mega embassy in London are expected to move forward despite security concerns. The United States has confirmed it will cut tariffs on South Korean imports to 15%, including auto tariffs, retroactive to the 1st of November. The move follows Seoul's push to pass legislation safeguarding its $350 billion strategic investment pledge in the United States.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says the move unlocks the full benefit of South Korea's trade deal with US President Donald Trump. Under the new structure, auto tariffs and other duties fall to 15%. The US will also remove tariffs on airplane parts and align South Korea's reciprocal rate with Japan and the European Union. The deal caps any future US national security tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals at 15%, putting South Korea on equal footing with Japan and Taiwan. Previously, South Korean imports faced a 25% duty. Seoul's legislation confirms its $350 billion commitment into US strategic sectors, from shipbuilding and AI to nuclear technology.
Now, the UK has secured a 0% tariff on all British medicines exported to the US for at least 3 years, in exchange for spending more on new American drugs. Under the agreement, by paying 25% more for new US medicines, British drugs, ingredients and medical devices will enter the US market tariff-free.
British Business and Trade Secretary Peter Kyle said the deal safeguards an industry worth £5 billion a year in exports, calling it essential for jobs, investment and the UK's role in global life sciences. The agreement comes after US President Donald Trump had threatened 100% tariffs on branded or patented pharmaceutical products unless companies built manufacturing plants in the US. Part of his push to make other countries pay more for medicines he said were unfairly subsidized by American consumers. The deal makes the UK the only country in the world for now with guaranteed zero tariffs on pharmaceutical exports to the US.
Here are more updates on China and Japan's tense relations. Vessels from both countries engaged in a new standoff around disputed islands earlier today. China's Coast Guard says a Japanese fishing vessel illegally entered the waters of the Diaoyu Islands, which Tokyo calls the Senkaku Islands. Japan's Coast Guard says it intercepted 2 Chinese ships as they approached the fishing vessel.
The Japanese-administered islands have long been a flashpoint between the two nations. Although Japan and China reached an in-principle agreement in 2008 to jointly exploit resources in the East China Sea, tensions have risen over the past decade. Beijing has stepped up ship deployments around the islands, with the number of Chinese Coast Guard vessels operating there hitting a record high last year. The number of days Chinese government vessels was spotted in the area also reached a record for the 3rd straight year in 2024. Prior to Tuesday's incident, the The China Coast Guard last entered the waters around the islands on November 16th, calling it a lawful patrol to uphold China's rights and interests.
Meanwhile, more than 1,900 flights from China to Japan scheduled for December have been cancelled as the dispute between the two countries deepens. Chinese state broadcaster CCTV says the cancellations account for more than 40% of all flights from China to Japan this month. Tensions between Beijing and Tokyo rose sharply in November after Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested Japan could deploy military forces if a conflict breaks out in the Taiwan Strait. China responded by issuing a travel warning urging its citizens to avoid Japan over safety concerns. Several Chinese airlines then offered refunds for Japan-bound flights through the end of 2025. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese travelers have since cancelled their trips, with December bookings down 35% compared to October. Travel platforms report that Russia, South Korea and parts of Southeast Asia are now seeing a surge in bookings from Chinese tourists who would otherwise travel to Japan. On Monday, Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a decree allowing Chinese citizens to enter Russia visa-free for up to 30 days until September 2026. The United States begins its year-long presidency of the G20 today, stepping in at a time of sharp tension with outgoing chair South Africa. Washington says its focus will be on global economic growth and practical outcomes.
In a statement, the State Department said it wants to push essential reforms, cut regulatory burdens, strengthen energy supply chains, and support the development of emerging technologies. Next year's G20 summit will be held in Miami at a golf resort owned by US President Donald Trump. He has already said South Africa will not be invited. The US did not attend this year's summit in Johannesburg, accusing South Africa of misusing its leadership role. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa rejected the criticism, insisting his country remained a full and constructive member of the G20. He also dismissed as false Trump's repeated claims that South Korea is committing genocide against Afrikaners or seizing land from white citizens.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has proposed to slash the core UN budget for next year by $577 million and cutting more than 18% of jobs. He outlined the plan as the UN approaches its 80th anniversary amid a severe cash shortfall, largely caused by unpaid contributions from the US. The US, which currently provides 22% of the UN's core budget, has signaled that it intends to reduce its payments. President Donald Trump has argued that the UN is falling short of its potential and has pledged to scale back US funding. Addressing the General Assembly's Budget Committee, Guterres said the UN ended 2024 with $760 million in arrears, including $709 million unpaid from that year alone. He added that a further $877 million in 2025 contributions had yet to be received, bringing total arrears to $1.586 billion. Guterres proposed a 2026 core budget of $3.238 billion, a 15% reduction from the current year. He said this funding would support political, humanitarian disarmament, economic, social and communications activities, while most financing for agencies such as the World Food Programme and UNICEF would continue to come from voluntary contributions. That wraps up AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.